This is Tara Powers, and I am leading a workshop today for you on creating an intentional culture on your team. So many of your colleagues have already attended this workshop in person, and I'm excited to do this recording for you to help you walk through the important key steps for creating an intentional culture. And so you want to make sure you have your workbook in front of you because we're going to be referencing that quite often. And I may ask you to just press pause on your video as you go through and have you do some stuff on your own. Okay, so let's start by having you think about the best team you were ever on. Maybe it was a sports team, a work team, a volunteer team. You know, just think about that best team you were ever on. And if I was able to ask you to describe a characteristic about the team, what might you say? Exciting? Had energy to get up to go to work every day? You were friends? Maybe you felt like you were really valued, listened to, right? So when we think about that best work team and we think about characteristics of that work team, it's really easy to think about all the things that made that team good. And I can guarantee you that it wasn't just the leader who really created that culture, it was every single team member. And that's what I want all of you watching this to keep in mind today, is that it is up to every single person on a team, how we show up every day, how open we are, the questions we ask, how we build relationships. It's up to us to build that team culture that we want. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. And please follow along in your workbook. So our agenda today is that we're going to talk about traditional versus new team leadership and what that looks like. We're also going to talk about strategies and agreements that are really important to helping you build that intentional, strong culture, challenges and obstacles of teams that every team will face at some point or another. And then we'll go over some tips and actually some activities of how to build trust and strong communication. All right, let's take a look at this traditional versus new team approach. And if you're following along in your workbook, what I want you to recognize is that some of the things on the traditional side you might still be experiencing on your own team, and that is okay. This is not about pointing out what's going wrong. This is about pointing out there may be opportunities, and certainly there probably are, for your team to embrace a new way of operating. And so when we think about that traditional team approach on the left-hand side, this is where the leaders usually plan and decide all the work. They usually figure out what's the best way to do things, and then they tell people about it, right? Our jobs tend to be very narrowly defined, meaning we stick to our task and we don't really learn anything else. So cross-training isn't actually viewed as important and maybe even inefficient. Most information is held tight to the vest by management. They don't share it, or maybe even employees don't share with their team. We focus training on technical issues. You don't see a lot of this type of training happening. People tend to work alone rather than collaborate. And recognition and rewards are based on how well an individual does, not necessarily how well is the team doing. So let's think about the new team approach. We're hiring a lot of super smart people in your company, right? And on your teams, and you're doing some amazing work. We have to assume that the people on our team have great ideas. They certainly do. They have insights, they have advice, they have input. And the new team approach is all about collaborating, right? It's planning the work together. It's broadening our skill set by helping make sure everyone on the team understands to some degree what other people do, and cross-training is normal, right? We're doing that quite frequently to make sure if anybody gets sick during this COVID, or somebody is out of the office for 2 weeks, we're able to step in and keep the team running. Information is shared frequently and consistently at all levels. Continuous learning is something that just happens as much as possible. Risk-taking is actually encouraged because we know that's where innovation happens. We constantly are looking for ways to work together and be inclusive and collaborative, and we base rewards not just on individual but team performance as well. That's the new team approach, and I can guarantee you anyone on your team is really looking for that because they want to be involved. They want to have a voice. They want to be heard, right? We all have opinions and ideas, and it's important to create an atmosphere where we can share those. So how do we actually do that? So what we're going to talk about next is some strategies for building a strong team culture. And this is based on all of the work I've done over the years with hundreds and hundreds of teams and thousands of team members. And I've identified 7 key strategies for building strong team culture. And as I go over these, if you follow along in your workbook, you're going to notice that on the second page there, after the image that you see on your screen, there's a bunch of descriptions or best practices under each strategy. And so as I go through these, I'd like you to check mark off any of the strategies you think or best practices that you think your team is already doing well, and circle any of the strategies you know we could be doing better. So one of the first strategies is establishing clear mission and purpose. Teams that know why they're there, what their purpose is in the organization, how they tie to company goals and values, and why what they do is important and matters, that creates a stronger team culture. Number 2, teams that focus on building trust and inspiring teamwork. The way that they do that is through making sure they have good, strong values and guidelines of how they work together, that they're constantly looking for ways to positively interact and encouraging the team to improve their work processes, right? And allowing people to own their tasks. Step 3 is facilitate and support team decisions. So this is where strong teams, they really develop team decision-making skills. So we're making decisions as much as possible together based on the collective wisdom of the group. We also clarify expectations for making those decisions. Maybe not all decisions can be made at a team level, but we understand why. This is really very helpful where we're doing this collaboratively. So strong teams are doing that quite frequently. Number 4, strong teams are constantly looking to expand the team's capabilities. So that's where we are looking at the team, figuring out who needs some training, who's ready for that next level task or that next level role. What are some of the things that might be holding team members back? Can we get them coaching? Can we give them training? Can we teach them with, have another team member mentor them or job shadow with them, those type of things. But this is how we really expand the team's capabilities, and we're using recognition as frequently as we can. 5, clearly defining roles and goals. So strong teams are very clear how work gets done, who's responsible, what does it look like when work is done successfully? So we have a clear idea of our measures, and we work to clearly define short-term and long-term goals, and we celebrate when goals are met. 6, make the most of team differences. Strong teams recognize that diversity on the team is going to always get you a better outcome. So we're actually looking for and seeking out differences in opinion, different perspectives, different approaches to make sure we're making the best decision for the team and for the business. And 7, foreseeing and influencing change. This is strong teams are constantly looking and sharing information about what if, right? What if we get a vaccine in the next 5 months? What if we don't get a vaccine for 2 years? What is happening in the industry that we should be talking about that could impact our customers or the services or the products that we provide to the world, right? So teams that have a strong culture are constantly looking for and discussing those what ifs and bringing information to the team to discuss how is this going to impact us. So those are some strategies that really, if you focus on them, build a strong team culture. And I'm actually going to show you a couple activities of how to do that. But one of the things that you may be asked is to share with your team What did you check mark off that the team is already doing as a best practice? And what is anything on this page that you've circled that you think the team could improve on? And why would it matter if the team did focus on it? So just know that this may be something that you actually, work on and talk about in the near future. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is actually some results from the survey that you participated in. We had about 21 participants, which is a pretty good number. And I asked this a question of all of you. You may not remember it now, but what is a best practice of a high performing team that if you focused on would positively transform your team the most? And the number one answer was building trust and inspiring teamwork. Now that doesn't surprise me as a best practice because trust is really the foundation of everything, right? If we have trust on our team, we can do anything. We can talk about anything. We can give feedback to each other. We can ask good questions, all of those things, share information, etc. Trust really does make a difference. So one of the things that you may participate in over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks is a team trust activity. And we did this in the workshop, and obviously, we won't be able to do it in person or live right now, but I do want to just walk you through what we did with your colleagues. And so we asked everybody at their tables to think about that best team that I asked you to think about at the beginning of this call, and how it felt when you were on that team and the way people treated each other. And just think of a story you might tell, right? What would be a story you could tell about what it was like to be a part of that team? And that would go in the left-hand column. And if you want, you can pause the video here and just write this down somewhere in your workbook, but what would be a great story about that team that you would share? And then on the right hand side, think about the behaviors that people engaged in regularly that allowed trust to occur, that made trust possible. So for example, maybe everyone really just made it a point to always check in with each other and communicate when they knew information, right? That was a behavior that everybody engaged in. One of the behaviors shared by your colleagues was we give recognition, right? That is a behavior that we do quite frequently, and we make a big deal about it. And it actually has really helped to encourage trust. So that could be a behavior. So think about that best team that you've ever been on, and then just pause this for a minute once you consider what are some of the behaviors that made trust possible. And if you had to vote on two for your own team, two behaviors that if we focused on this, it would make the biggest difference to us, I think, right? If in your own opinion, circle what those behaviors would be or put a little star next to them. But take a few minutes to pause this recording. Think about that team that you've been on that was really amazing. What are the behaviors that led to trust happening or occurring? And then if you could pick two behaviors that you think would make the biggest difference, what would those be? So go ahead and pause the recording now. Okay. Welcome back. Hopefully you did that activity. Most likely you're going to do that activity with your teammates over the next week or two, because we are encouraging all of the managers to work with their team on that. Excuse me. So let's talk about some other tools that we've provided you as part of this program. And again, remember, when you think about creating an intentional team culture, the idea of intentional means we have to actually plan it. We need to schedule it. We have to have discussions about it. We need tools so that we can intentionally create it. And so I'm going to give you 3 tools right now. And again, your team may be using these, and I hope will over the next several weeks. But the first one is talking about team purpose. Now, interestingly, in your assessment results, or excuse me, your pre-survey results, your group actually scored this really high. You are very clear on what your team purpose is and why you exist, and that's wonderful. Where there seems to be a little bit of room, not much, but a little room for improvement, is making that purpose more energizing and inspirational. And we know these two things, making sure you're clear on purpose and making sure it's energizing and inspirational, are really important for team trust and team building and cohesiveness to occur and to have that strong team culture. So if you go to your workbook and you turn to the page that says Tools for Building Team Trust and Communication, what you're going to see are several good questions that your team can talk about if you feel like there's an opportunity here. What is our team purpose? Why do we exist? How does our team support the overall goals and strategy of the company? Do all team members understand and agree with our purpose? And then this last question is the really important one. Does our purpose have deeper meaning other than just describing the work that we do? How is our purpose energizing and inspirational? How can we make it more energizing and inspirational? So this is one tool for having a discussion around team purpose and clarity around that, okay? Let's introduce a second tool, and that is setting team agreements. And one of the things I mentioned in the session with your colleagues was if you're going to start anywhere and you don't have any agreements in place, this is the place to start, right? Setting team agreements is like creating bumper rails. It's basically saying, hey, on this team, this is how we agree to treat each other. And I can feel some confidence and safety around that, right? I can feel grounded knowing these are agreements or values that we have all said, yes, I agree, this is important, and I will commit to showing up like that on the team every day. And so if you go to your handouts, what you're going to see is some exercise on team agreements. And one of the important things for you to think about is what agreements, if you have any, does your team have in place that are really important? So some that were shared was, making sure everyone is heard in a meeting. That's an agreement. Another agreement might be we do recognition once a month, right? Another agreement might be we show up to our meetings on time. So let me show you a few examples of agreements that other teams have developed, and you can see them here on the screen. But basically, we listen to understand, not judge. We don't gossip. If we have conflict, we go directly to the person involved. We strive to make the workplace comfortable for all. We keep others informed of our progress, and we actually train people, cross-train people on really important tasks that we do so that, if you get sick or you're out of the office, we can still keep moving forward. So if you look at your workbook, this is a tool I've provided you for setting some team agreements. There's actually the instructions, and then there's some questions. What I'd like you to do for a minute is just pause this recording, and I want you to think about at least 2 to 3 agreements that you feel would be really important for your team to adopt. So if your team all agreed, this is how we're going to treat each other, this is how we're going to operate, what would those 2 or 3 be that you believe are really important and would help the team build an intentional, positive team culture and trust? So pause for a minute and just write those ideas down on this paper. All right. Now, one of the things that's really important when the team does this exercise together is that you actually talk about, do we all have agreement that we'll do this? We will commit to doing these things, right? Do we all commit to abiding by these agreements? Are there any we already do and they're going to be easy? And are there some that are going to be hard? And then lastly, how are we going to hold each other accountable for these agreements, right? If we notice someone isn't doing what we agreed to, what are we going to do about it? That's a really important question for a team to ask. So again, another great tool to start building that intentional culture. And I wanted to share this survey result with you. I asked about some behaviors that could certainly become agreements on teams and which one you felt your teams are already doing and which ones you could do more of. And the one that what you were doing pretty well was practicing inclusion. And the one that could use some work was cross-training. all right, engaging in cross-training. So those are the two that I wanted to point out, but perhaps your team might decide that we need to start agreeing to do cross-training and agreeing what that looks like. Okay, and then let's look at our last tool for teams, and that is what's another way we can talk about team trust, right? If we know trust is something we want to build, and we want to inspire more teamwork and trust on our team, how do we do that? So if you look in your workbook, what you're going to notice is that there are 4 elements of trust: reliability, acceptance, openness, and congruence. Reliability is I do what I say I'm going to do. You can count on me, right? If I say I'm going to get you something by 2 on Friday, I know you're going to get it to me by then, or you're going to tell me why you couldn't. Acceptance is basically saying, hey, you were hired on this team for a purpose, and I respect that you have a right to be here, and who you are is okay with me. What acceptance doesn't mean is that we accept poor performance or bad behavior. That isn't okay. This is just more of an acceptance of a human being, okay? Openness is I am willing, and this one's tricky, I am willing to both give constructive feedback and receive constructive feedback, or even ask for it. And I do it freely. I also openly share and acknowledge ideas. I encourage other ideas when I'm talking with people. That is practicing openness, which is an important element of trust. And then the fourth, and also very important, is congruence. I walk my talk. If any of you listening to this agree, team culture and team trust is super important, then you have to also commit to engaging in some of the behaviors that we know build trust on a team. So you walk your talk. So I'm going to ask you again to pause this video, and there are some discussions in your workbook that I'd like you to think about. When you look at these 4 elements, which of them come most easily for you and which is most difficult? And what do you think is easiest for your team overall, and what is most difficult? And how is that impacting your work together? So all of those questions are in your workbook. Go ahead and hit pause and answer those questions now. And eventually, hopefully, your team will talk about these things together. Okay, let me share a couple survey results around this topic, which definitely impact those 4 elements of trust. And that was how respectful are your team members towards each other. And you can see about 54% said very respectful and above, and about 43% said somewhat respectful, right? Maybe some days it's good, some days it's not so good. So there's a little opportunity there. Next question that I think is really important is how honest are we with each other? Now again, 52% said very honest and 42% said somewhat honest, right? So that basically is maybe some days I'm not honest, or maybe you have half of the team that you trust and you feel is honest and half isn't. So there's opportunity for this as well. And then lastly, just straight up, how well does your team trust each other? And again, about 46% said very well and above, and we have about 52% that said we're doing okay, right? Somewhat well. So there's opportunity, right? Opportunity to build trust. And we've provided you with a bunch of tools to do that. We provided your managers with that trust building activity as well, right? There's so many different ways we can start to jump in and talk about trust as a team. But before you get into those conversations, it's also super helpful to know that you're going to face obstacles. You probably are facing them today, right? We all have obstacles that get in our way when we're on a team. And so I want to introduce you to two things. Number one is obstacles to team success, which could be related to the phase of team development that you're in. So if you look at your workbook, you're going to see what we call Tuckman's phases of team development. And this is a natural phenomenon that occurs on teams. It happens anytime there is a change in team membership, so the leader, different team members. It also can happen anytime there's a big shift in process, goals, anything that really changes how we operate. So when those things happen, a major transition or a major change on the team, you're going to go through these four phases of team development. The first phase is called forming. This is where the team has to come together around a task, or maybe you're coming together for the first time as a team, and we're trying to figure out what to do. We're trying to actually establish some base level expectations and agree on goals. And we're just trying to figure out and maybe develop trust with each other and figure out how are we going to move forward. And very quickly, teams move from that stage to the second one, which is storming. And storming is where it doesn't feel very good, right? We start to get into conflict. My idea is better. I don't think that's the right way. Who put you in charge, right? We start to identify control and power issues. We're starting to recognize that communication is an issue. Perhaps we don't have the right resources to do the job or the skill set to get something done. There's a lot of conflict in this stage, expressing of different opinions, a lot of reaction, and some members are working by themselves and some members are working together. It's clunky, right? It does not feel good. So what has to happen in this stage to move people to stage 3 is really what we call the agreements, right? The things that we've been talking about, setting agreements, using those tools for discussion. The way that we get to norming, where things start to feel normal, is that we get clarity. We get clarity around purpose, roles and responsibilities, values, agreements of how we treat each other. We start operating, walking our talk, right? We're congruent. What we say is what we do. Those are the things that need to happen to move the team into the norming phase. And from there, trust starts to be built. And once that trust is really tight, that's when we become a high-performing team. That's when we start to collectively achieve some amazing results, where we start to find solutions to problems together. We start to identify with each other as a team, and we work together collaboratively. And that's where we always want to be, right? Everybody aspires to being a high-performing team. What's important to recognize is you're always going to go back to one every time a new significant change happens. So when you notice the team struggling, just recognize you might just be in that storming stage, and now you have tools to move you forward. All right, let's look at some common obstacles that teams face. And as I go through this list, I want you to think about what are one of the challenges maybe on this list that your team has. And then I'm going to let you know how you answered on the survey. So obviously lack of trust is a huge challenge for teams that want to build an intentional culture. If trust isn't there, it's not going to happen, right? We got to work on that first. If we are not engaging in healthy debate and healthy conflict, that can also certainly get in the way of teams working well together. You might also be holding back information. Maybe people feel like, hey, we're not sharing enough information with each other. Maybe we're not getting all the information that we need. That can be a challenge. Low engagement. Right now, people are dealing with a lot, right? And that can be affecting morale. And it's really hard to get people to engage and be interested in this intentional culture and put the energy into it that's necessary. Perhaps we're not aligned. We're not clear on what our short-term goals are. We're maybe not clear on roles and responsibilities. That can also be an issue. Lack of cohesion or collaboration. So we're still working in silos. Lack of honesty, and transparency. And this could be because people are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to be truthful, right? Because maybe in the past, their hands got slapped for doing that. And then lastly, perhaps you have people on your team who are afraid to learn something new. Maybe they realize, wow, things are shifting, things are changing, technology's changing, and I'm scared. I don't want to learn something new. I like doing it the way that I know how. That can also become a challenge for creating that tight team culture, that intentional team culture. So I want you to take a minute and in your mind, think of this list. If you had to identify which of these challenges you felt your team may be struggling with, which one would you pick? And I'm going to share with you in a minute what everyone said, the whole group in the survey. So just take a minute to think about that. Hopefully you have it in your head. All right, so here are the results of the survey. So when I asked this question of everyone, the number one answer was holding back information. So holding back information was the one that was voted the biggest challenge for your teams. And then in second place was a tie, unproductive conflict, and lack of cohesion and collaboration. So those are some of the challenges. And the goal here is that as a team, we recognize they're there, right? They're there. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong, just means we have opportunity. And so where do we go from here? So one of the things that you're going to see in the back of your handouts is what we call the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, 5 dysfunctions of a team assessment. And this is an assessment that I'm really encouraging all of your teams to do and talk about together, because it's really going to help you figure out what is it that's holding us back. Is it the trust? Is it conflict? Is it commitment, avoidance of accountability, or avoidance of results, or not getting results? And so I encourage you, after you're done watching this, to just take 5-10 minutes to complete that. And then hopefully you'll be sharing that with your team. Together you can share this and talk about it and start working on it. Right? And I've provided a bunch of activities, and your managers have even more to help you with building more trust, or mastering productive conflict, or achieving commitment, and everybody embracing holding each other accountable and focusing collectively on results instead of individually. So you want to take that assessment after we're done today, after you're done watching this call, and just think about, how you would answer those questions, and then hopefully share them over the next couple weeks together as a team. Okay. So quick review, we talked about a lot of great things to create that intentional team culture today, including the difference between traditional and new team leadership and how we want to move in that new team leadership direction, strategies and agreements that build that strong team culture, challenges and obstacles that teams face and how to overcome them. And then we talked about a variety of tools and activities that help build trust. So with all that in mind, I want to encourage you to go to the page in your workbook that says your 30-day action plan. And going back to the beginning of this program, I mentioned this is a team effort, right? It can't just be your leader. All of us have to be involved in shifting and changing our behaviors to make that intentional team culture that we want. So I'd like for you to maybe go back through your workbook, thinking about what you heard, things that you wrote down. What is 1 or 2 things that you're willing to commit to after listening to this, and that you're willing to share with your team? Here's what I'm trying to work on, right? It's a 30-day action plan. I'm going to commit to this new behavior, or I'm going to shift and do this for the next 30 days and see if it has a positive impact. So really think about, what is your commitment to your team? And then your manager is going to help make sure those conversations keep happening over the next few weeks. So I want to thank you for listening to this training today. I hope that it was helpful and that you have some amazing tools to go create that intentional team culture that everybody wants on their team. Thank you.